Thank you everyone, and welcome to the third event of the new 1 Million Leader app. I'm very glad to be with you. My name is Franz, and today we are with Savera from Sri Lanka, right now late in Singapore, and we are helped by Kelly from early morning in Colombia. So hello everyone. We will talk just after about this great webinar organized today by Savera. As you may know, we are, let's say, powered by the new 1 Million Leader app. So I need to show you a bit more about this app before we start. Just let me share my screen for some seconds. Here we are. The webinar is called today A Journey to Circularity from Theory to Practice when Tackling Plastic Challenges. We are going into a journey with Savera today from Sri Lanka, as I said. And just to let you know, you can see here, today is powered by the 1 Million Leaders app, the new program of Nellis. We have a lot of hope, let's say, based in this program all together. Why? Because it's a mobile application, and the idea is the users, by using this mobile application, to be able to support, to empower, to fund all our 1 Million Leaders fellows worldwide. Concretely, by joining the app, by $1 the month, the price of a coffee, by the way, it depends where, but in Greece, it's more or less the price of a Freddo cappuccino. You can first empower, meaning that we have a lot of 1 million leaders worldwide, and they are dreaming, they have a lot of nice initiatives, they need to feel empowered and supported, and by joining this app, you can empower them directly. Please mute everyone. Then app, you are also sorry. Mute yourself, everyone. Thank you. Then also by joining this app, you can witness what we say, a witness, because you will be able to follow and the activities of all our fellows. You know, we have fellows in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in the Arabic countries, and so you can follow their adventures, their journeys, by the way, and it can be really inspiring for young entrepreneurs, for example. Then by the app, you can learn, because by using the app, you have access to a lot of micro trainings in a wide range of sustainability issues made by experts from the Next Leaders University, which is very interesting as well. And it's a privilege because you are the only one to be able to access it. No one else can. And finally, here we are, by using this 1 OML app, you can belong. Belong, why? Because we are part of a community and we organize a lot of community events every month. Savera webinar is one of them today. As you will see, she will bring us into a journey, but before everything, who are you, Savera? That's my first question. I think it's quite simple. So maybe you can let us know a bit more about you, and welcome, Savera.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you so much for having me. I would like to think I am a human striving to be a better human in all aspects. But so I am from Sri Lanka originally, but living now in Singapore, and have been in this kind of space for a long time. I will take you a little bit on my journey and the thinking, but for me, I think waste is a really interesting a symptom of the systems we live in, and a low-hanging fruit if we can figure out some of those solutions and have them replicate themselves. So I tend to immerse myself in different systems and different thoughts and to understand better how we can kind of solve. Maybe Kelly, maybe just I'm just gonna mute the participants who are not muting themselves. But yes, Franz, I hope that answers the question, but I can delve into more if you want.
No, but it's fine. I think people will know you because they will know more about your journey right now. It's the moment, because today we are very privileged because Savera has known, as you will see, a lot of things. I will say everything, but it's not true, but almost everything around sustainability, plastic challenges, circularity, different kind of people to work with in different countries, etc. So it's like we have the experience in front of us with the failures, with the successes, and for everyone who is willing, I would say, to engage for this kind of journey as well. I think your insight today will be very important and crucial and valuable. So I think you can start right now, Savera. We are with you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm just gonna share my window here. Can you all see?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Great. So let me just describe my journey a little bit first. Ignore the squiggly loops. I feel like my life has been a little bit like that, where it's jumping from one place to the other. But with this webinar, but also in general, it's nice to see that there is like a general thread when it comes to waste and circularity. So I'm excited to share it with you. So I think this journey in circularity for me started, and I'll just give you an overview so it makes a little bit more sense for you. But this journey started for me when I started running one of my family's companies, which was in manufacturing, and it so happened to be in paper packaging. And for me, I was just trying to make the company more sustainable while it was in packaging. But being from Sri Lanka and living in Sri Lanka, and I think there's a lot of you joining from the global south, you know that waste is a huge issue. We don't have a lot of infrastructure, and a mountain of waste collapsed in Sri Lanka, displacing 104 and killing me, I think 37 people at the time. So that kind of started my journey to say, okay, well, if I'm in packaging, I need to figure out how to solve these things, or at least find some answers somewhere in terms of, if packaging accounts for 40% of waste, where do we start? Where can we find solutions? So that kind of led me to starting a brand, which then became a startup. And that was, sourcing and supplying compostable packaging. And through that, I also started a coalition, or attempted to start a coalition. We did a lot of different things to bring in, because there were so many stakeholders in this waste management kind of ecosystem in Sri Lanka. So we brought in, citizen groups and government institutions and businesses and individuals, and trying to start a conversation. One part of it was also making a documentary. From there, I kind of went into understanding that a lot of policy and governance needs to change around it. So I took a quick stop in policy and took a master's in policy, which led me to the UNDP on their global plastics Taskforce, helping different governments on the national action plans for circular economy. Which then led me to my current role, which is in corporate consulting with the company called South Pole, which is the penguin you see. And that's corporate consulting, also development work with multilaterals like the World Bank or other institutions, and then also policy, so working with different governments on helping them with their policy. So just to take a step back, when we talk about the circular economy, I think all of you are familiar with it, but just the idea that, right now we have this take, make, waste kind of system where we use something and it has a short lifespan, usually, completely disproportionate and tiny compared to how much energy and time it's been taken to make, and then how long it's going to last on the planet. And so, we are trying to, a circular economy is trying to say, okay, how can we recirculate those materials back into the system so it's not a waste of materials and resources in general. So many of you would have seen this system, but a lot of the time it kind of breaks into portions. So we hear refuse, we hear reduce, we hear recycle, reuse, rot. And so for me, it was, while there were all of these different kind of components, it's hard to sometimes, and maybe some of you have encountered this, it's hard to kind of see, you know, how all of this plays in, or how any of it have any impact. So for me, it was about, you know, asking these questions. And this, you know, later on, I found a quote that kind of encapsulated what I was feeling at the time is, you know, what if every single act of design or manufacturing made the world a better place? And that's, you know, the kind of the big goal. But, you know, what if every intervention resulted in greater biodiversity, healthier soil, you know, additional outlets for beauty and expression, and a deeper, more connected sense of ourselves, but ourselves in a grander ecosystem, or, you know, in a living ecology. And then that would, you know, result in transportation systems, supply chains, all kind of changing, and us understanding our role as citizens on a planet. And, you know, that was done in a more equitable way. So this kind of question for me sparked understanding, okay, how can we take a circular economy, for example, and move it into something that, you know, I imagined a world where if you could, you know, I come from Sri Lanka, from the global south, and we don't have a lot of infrastructure. So imagine if you know, you threw something completely after you've used it as much as you possibly can, and then when it's at its end, it's not actually its end, it's giving more life, you know, soil, plants could grow from it, it could be completely regenerative. And that was the question I was trying to ask. So it was also moving, when as I mentioned, I started with the factory. How can we move from this kind of notion of green or sustainable, where we're on a planet that, you know, it's ailing, it's suffering, it can't be really sustained, it needs to be restored, it needs to be regenerated. So how can we look at the systems, at circularity, to be restorative or regenerative? And for me, I was understanding it as, you know, a circular economy is a practice. It is a way that it is a step that we cannot sidestep. We have to go through to understand how to circulate these materials to become then restorative and then regenerative. So it was kind of moving down the spectrum, this kind of spectrum as you see here. But the circular economy was that kind of, you know, next step, necessary step to understand and kind of solve for before we could get more and more regenerative and restorative with our supply chains. So it is circularity, but really the question I was asking, you know, and is, you know, there are so many people even on this call that I know are, you know, deeply embedded in regeneration, you know, really creating the conditions for life to flourish. And this was something that, for me, it was looking at, you know, how can I look at my company that as an organism? Because all organisms, you know, if you look at a tree, once it dies, as we know it, it will become a log, but it will then rot and give so much nutrients to the soil. It has a role to play. It's not done there. So I was looking really, and if you can see in even the kind of the logo of the company was, you know, how can we keep things cycling back and completely circular? So then, you know, much later on, I was, you know, really lucky to have come across some of the work of Carol Sanford, which has allowed me to kind of put it in a system. And I will show you this and keep connecting back to it just to kind of make sense of it. But the work of Carol Sanford was allowed me to put into words and articulate really how I was looking at these different businesses as organisms. And just to give you a little bit of an understanding of it, and I promise you I'll get more into it, but essentially it's, you know, my interpretation of it is, you know, looking at the internal system. Like if you look at a cell or an organism, you know, what is the essence? What is the core of what it's trying to do? What is its role within a whole? What are all the different little parts that make the whole, make the cell? But then also, what is that latent potential within it? And then, how do we develop that into its external environment? How is it nested within a larger ecosystem? What are the different fields that it can play in, and what are the different interventions that we can make to move these systems in the way that we want, where to see the systems change that we want? And so these are the kind of questions that I kept asking myself in the different phases, as I showed you, of where I was going with my life. So I started, as I said, with, so I was running a manufacturing company in packaging. And for me here, it was essentially, what is the essence? And for me, the essence of any business is really the people, because you can take all the other elements out, but if you don't really have the people within it and the relationships, for me, that was the essence. And it was within a rural community. So it was, we are making packaging, but how do we take the people within it and say, how can we understand them for the community that they're in, and what is then the potential? So this was really a transition from, so there's paper packaging, which is kind of innately, if you look at within a biological cycle, because it can break down and hopefully compost, what are we trying to do with this packaging, and what is the potential for packaging? And so those were the kind of core essence of looking at this business. And I thought, well, if we're looking at packaging, and so the essence of this company was packaging. And if you look at the role of packaging within, when I was asking myself, how is waste created? It comes back to, how do we make this packaging have a bit more impact on its external environment?
Savera, just a question. Sorry to disturb. You are still in slide 1, right? So there is not a technical issue from your side?
Oh, no, I've been going from slide to slide.
Because we see only slide 1.
Oh my
Anyway,
goodness.
no, it's fine. It was clear, but maybe you can go back to 2 or 3 slides.
Do you see any of the slides changing or no?
Now it's changing now. Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
So this was the circular economy system. Sorry, I'll just quickly, this was the kind of the vision for me. This was the spectrum of, how do we move from sustainable to regeneration, and then the kind of definition for regeneration. I'm so sorry. This would have been much harder to understand if you didn't have this image, but this was the Carol Sanford principles for regenerative business, which was, what is the essence of a business? How do the different pieces come as a whole? What is the potential? How is it nested within the ecosystem? And what are the different fields that it works in, and where are the interventions for the systems change that we want? And so, as I said, the essence of the company that I was running, and Franz, you can see a slide that says essence, right? With a bunch of people.
All right, we are good now. Thank you.
Great. And so the essence was people for me in this, and people, and connecting people and packaging within a community. But going into the potential of what we were really trying to do, it was what is the role of packaging? And that's kind of really when I started exploring, where can we bring in kind of packaging and circularity within, and move from, just a sustainable business, as you saw in the factory, we were solar powering and we were doing stuff within the company, but what was the essence? It was packaging at the time. And, what is the role of packaging to move us along this spectrum? And so it was, how can we use circular thinking? I am into moving to regenerative, also understanding the environment that we were in. So going to the essence of it, it made me question, what do we really need? And at the time, for me, it was starting a packaging company to be able to source compostable packaging, because in a country like Sri Lanka, where we don't have a lot of waste management infrastructure, it was necessary, when we talk about the essence of what do we want, the essence is really, we want to reduce waste, right? So can we can this packaging become something else? Can it regenerate? Can it compost if there's nothing else that can be done with it? And can it, replenish the soil? So that was the birth of Ananta. And so bear with me. I'm also trying to show you the different transitions. So the slides are from the different decks and the different chapters of my life. So thematically, they will also change. But essentially, we were trying to have compostable packaging that was really easily accessible because, we wanted it to be widespread. We wanted it to be used and easily accessible. We were also trying to say, trying to look at, how can we look at different materials, whether it's made from agri-waste, but does it have seeds embedded? What materials can it be made with? And one of the lines that we did was, I'm sorry, Moomin, I'm going to mute you. But regenerative, natural, circular, and then ecosystem. So we were looking at, some of this packaging was taking invasives and making a pulp out of it and embedding seeds in it, made by a community of women. And the other thing was training different community members. If you remember, the essence of the first journey was, how do we bring in community into this as well? That's a huge part of it. And so it was, how do we train different communities to make packaging? So we were trying to see, how can we disrupt supply chains in a way that they're more localized and contextualized, so it's not linear. Even the little our supply chains were more circular in that sense. And so, yeah, we worked, as I said, we did skills training, and we were trying to teach make our supply chain into little pockets where the whole thing was taken care of by the different pockets, and they would become suppliers instead of this linear supply chain that depended on us. These were all different experiments. Of course, we were a startup. By most means, we weren't a successful startup, but in terms of all the different experiments and learnings, this was really always, I was asking myself, what is the essence of what we're trying to do? Is it, what is the potential? What is the potential within a larger ecosystem? Who do we want to engage? And it was always, how do we reduce waste? How do we engage communities to do that? And so these were some of the principles that we went through, and I'm going to kind of rush through it, but essentially it was, how do we make packaging kind of disappear, but how do we also have social co-benefits? How do we work with different education campaigns, make sculptures? How do we use expression and art as a way to educate and engage people in this? So we designed some principles around the essence, which is, community, and the essence, which is, how do we reduce packaging? In this instance, it was through compostable materials. So again, when you go back to when you're working on the grassroots, as I said, we were working with different communities on the ground. You go back to, what is the essence? What is the whole? Where are we nested within a system? And that kind of led me to understanding that the system, where does it need to develop? We also need some policy. So quickly made a stop and did a master's in policy and administration, and then which led me to the UNDP. And here, for me, it was kind of going back to this question of what is needed, what are the interventions that are needed, what are the fields that we need to focus to grow the system, and what does circularity, in my understanding of it, need? And so one of them was, how do we scale materials so they're accessible? How do we, get funding for infrastructure? How do we and increase collection systems? And so that, if I dug further into that, what I felt was really missing was the funding aspect. So this was what I was trying to leverage within the UNDP, was if you went back to, what were the nodal interventions? It was trying to look at who needs the funding the most for good alternatives to, say, plastic or materials that weren't circular. How do we scale materials that are circular? And here the the necessity at the time, still, I feel, is also, where does the funding go? So this led me to looking at not only, how do we look at collection systems, but where's the funding that going into it? So if, bear with me, this was for a big report essentially, but how do we leverage funding to look at collection, look at different materials, take community circular hubs, and have these material recovery facilities that are funded properly, so you can enable circular loops. So if you look at a circular system or circular economy, where are the nodal interventions? And one of them was funding, one of them was the circular hubs and the material recovery facilities. Going back then, when I was in that role, some of the challenges also was, how high level do you want to be? How much impact do you want to have? And for me, that became a big question, because as I said, I'd been in grassroots for a long time. So if I looked at, what is the essence, one part of it is, how do we really impact people, but what needs development? If you look at, a funding model, like I showed you earlier, a huge part to play is the large corporations. How do we get in there? And if you look at number 7, what are the fields within those that have the most impact? And that, for me, it was, fast moving consumer goods companies with so much packaging, especially, all the sachets, all the packets. How do we get to them? And that question kind of led me to my new role, which is, so I'm the regional lead for a corporate consulting company called South Pole. And South Pole has quite a presence around the world. They're known for their carbon projects, but they also have, through their customers, they also have a circular economy practice, which I lead for the Asia Pacific region. And so what we do here is also, okay, how do we measure the plastic? How do we measure the packaging of these companies, and then help them internally through the companies reduce their packaging, and help them redesign their systems, help them finance projects on the ground, like the projects I spoke of earlier, the projects on the ground that I was a part of in the beginning of my journey, and hopefully will continue to be a part of. But it was, which fields do we need? Where are the interventions? How can we get in within these companies and help them? So yeah, that's kind of my journey, and this is the offer I work on now. And I think, France, I'm a minute over, so I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Savera. A lot of things. We have seen also principles, we have seen steps, and I think everyone has to have this in mind before starting and during also their own journey. Personally, I have some questions, more to launch also the discussion with the participant. I had a question, if you can ask question live now. Just we have the panel, and then during the chat you can ask questions, or in the chat, or also live by unmuting yourself just after. So I will share just again my screen. Thank you, Savera, again.
Yes.
Here we are. So I call this panel time. Okay, you understood?
Yep.
First question. Oh, sorry, I have an issue maybe. Just a second. I will try again, just a second. Okay, maybe I cannot share my screen. Just a second, Savera. Do you have the question in front of you? Because I have an issue.
I do not, but I can pull it up in a second.
Just a second, yeah. Because
I'm drowning in Windows. It's going to take me a minute.
My computer is going a bit complicated now. Okay.
Actually.
Okay, if you can, you have them on your, you have the slides on your own computer, Savera, you can share it, maybe the question?
Let me see, I have it on a different email, but can I just ask the question, like read out the questions, and then?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, yeah, and after I will disconnect and connect again to be sure, but yes, yeah, please, Savera.
Sure. So I am sorry, guys. 1 second. Let me just.
No problem. Any question you have also, everyone, you can ask them in the chat. Savera will look and we can answer the question of everyone.
Sorry, guys. I have.
Let me try also.
Okay, here. So question 1 is, your journey showcases the impact of individual efforts in addressing the plastic pollution crisis. Could you elaborate on how these small individual actions can be harnessed collectively to drive substantial change on a global scale?
Yes,
Oh,
it's just to simplify. This question is because we are all individuals here. Maybe we have a very small scales, ideas of initiative, but still we want to be impactful both in theory, into practice, and to have concrete impact at the global way. How you can balance both, not to be disappointed by being too local and still have global objectives. That's the question. Thank you.
no worries. It's $1 million question. I don't know if I have a concrete answer, but I can tell you how I grapple with it all the time. And I think one part of it is, what are all the individual actions I can take, knowing that I am one of, billions of people. And that's just, my day-to-day stuff. How can I, try to really, what I've been looking at is, how do I perceive value of products and things? How do I increase the usage and the value of those products, whether it's through reusing things, repurposing things, composting things. So on an individual level, I think practicing, like, really leaning into the fact that I do have some autonomy in increasing the value of the products, but then also in my professional life, I guess I'm always interested in looking at models that are replicable, that can be used. My current role is trying to understand how you technically measure and you actually work with companies in helping them, try to reduce their waste and look at more systems that are circular. But in terms of individual, how can individual actions, I think this is a bit of a tired trope, but it's just you don't need everyone doing it perfectly, or you need everyone doing it imperfectly. And I think it's just, yes, we can feel helpless, but if you look at all of the stuff that's happening on the planet, it's just because we're all kind of individually taking our cars to work and individually just throwing things and eating a packet of noodles and tossing it. So as much as we can say, I don't have any impact, it's all of us thinking I don't have any impact that's having the gravest impact. So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is, how do we work with the big corporations that are so much in their inertia, that they haven't looked at how their systems can change, and quite often it's a low-hanging fruit. And I mean, this is a group of entrepreneurs, right? Like, I think that's the biggest vehicle for change, is if we have more and more businesses. And as much as we think, there are these huge, large corporations, like where most of our economies are made of collections of small businesses. And so if we're all looking at how can we revise our models, how can we work collectively, I think that's huge. And I think we continuously underestimate the impact of that, and the impact of working collaboratively. So yeah, I was, yeah.
That's good. No, very interesting. Instead of answering my question, we have a lot of questions for you in the chat. I will tell you 3 questions. You can go yourself through them. The first one is from Sarah. Do you have a EPR policy, let's say responsibility policy from Sri Lanka that could help this initiative? Because maybe some countries do not have such kind of policy, so you can feel that you are alone and you cannot answer if you are not supported by the governments, or at least the public body. The second question is very concrete. It's from Jonita. She's Jonita asking you, sorry, if you have this kind of, if you have some representative of your project in Namibia, why not? Maybe soon, apparently. And third question also from Chris. Hello, Chris from Costa Rica. What do you think should be the top public policies regarding all types of plastic? So we have questions linked with public policies here.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So in Sri Lanka, we are struggling for a long time with enabling our EPR. So it's still very much I can't mute her, but yeah, in Sri Lanka, we're still struggling with getting our EPR together. But in my role at South Pole, we work with a lot of different governments in stakeholder engagement and looking at the, within the Asia Pacific region, mostly ASEAN though, so Southeast Asia mostly, of looking at the EPR. And I think there's a few countries that have made headway, I think, namely the Philippines and India, but there's a lot of different moving parts, and it's glitchy, but it's moving in the right direction, I think. And I'm not present in Namibia, but I would love to be, if that helps. I know my company does carbon projects, but I'm not too involved in carbon projects. I'm not at all involved in the carbon projects for numerous reasons, but they have a presence there. And to Chris's question, I think also, hi, Chris, good to see you. I think one thing that I've seen that India is doing with the EPR, which is very exciting and interesting, is that, and it seems quite simple, but I think that there's a lot that can be done with it, is mandating that a percentage of their packaging, especially food packaging, has recycled plastic. So in terms of, so most countries right now, just for your information, like for Sri Lanka, for example, it's still, you cannot use recycled plastic in your food packaging. Like the food grade material does not allow for recycled content. Whereas India is not just allowing it, it is requiring that it has 30%. So I would imagine that for plastics, for circularity, I think one part of it is, phasing the single-use plastics. Like it shouldn't be a thing. It's a poor use of an incredible material. But the second thing is, how do we have monomers, not polymers? So we have a lot. So two policies, I would say. One of them is not having mixed multi-layer materials, like the flexible packaging, like the aluminum lining. I think that's terrible. You can't really do much with it. But if you had non-mixed recyclable, and this word recyclable is also thrown around a lot, but if you had mandated, a percentage of recycled content in all of your packaging, then that would really exacerbate a circular economy, or stimulate a circular economy. That with the fact that you don't have these multi-layer horrible sachets and packets. Human really wants to party.
Yes. No, that's a very interesting insight. Also, just to tell you from the European perspective, in which we have a lot of environmental public policies, it looks very positive, but it can be not very positive sometimes because after we lack a bit of motivation. It's like when we engage with our social enterprise for it, like we are just suppliers of a bigger level administration, and it's like we cannot have imagination. We just follow the rules that have to be followed. So sometimes it's also nice, sorry to say it, that we are new in the domain in our country, because it's more adventurous and it's nice. I don't know if you agree with that, Savera. And just after, we can since we have here Noor, who is planning to launch this kind of project. Maybe Noor, after Savera just comment on my own question, you can ask Savera and unmute yourself if you have questions. I'm sure they will be interesting for everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Franz. I do think that, yes, sometimes policies, as much as they're trying to help, sometimes are not well thought out. And can have all these other unintended consequences. I do know, and I mean, listen, I think the carbon market has a lot of issues with it, but fundamentally, I think if can leverage market forces to protect existing forests, that's a good thing, but a lot of other things are problematic. But the example I'm trying to draw from here is that it was not the compliance market, but it was the voluntary market that went forward. So I think there is potential. While we need a lot of policies in place, I do think there's a lot of potential for voluntary actions to have great impact. And if you look at, some of what we perceive as the, great offenders, have taken a lot, because there's been a lot of pressure on these companies. They have a lot of internal processes and they're looking at the development. And I can only say that that's kind of why I wanted to join this kind of consulting, is to see what companies are doing internally. And a lot of companies have taken those initiatives because the pressure that we have put. So individual action, definitely pressuring these companies. Nonprofits are taking, the Danons to court. But they're also clients, because they're also really looking at what can they do internally within a whole old machine that's moving in one direction. So I think there's, a lot to be done and a lot to be said for voluntary action from companies, especially the social enterprises of the world. I think they're the ones who really define what needs to happen. And the last thing I'll put is, in these regenerative principles, one of them is the edge effect. And the edge effect is that at the periphery, a lot of different new things happen. That's a catalyst. If you look at the periphery of two ecosystems, say like a mangrove, where it's like a wetland and a coastal ecosystem coming together, the action, the things that are happening there are much greater than some other ecosystems. So how can we leverage what is happening in this, the social enterprise or startup world for these big machines that take a long time to change? How can we have that shift of, capital for thinking, for innovation, for how things are done when it's agile and you don't have to answer to a bureaucratic system? So I think there's a lot of potential for exchange, even within a voluntary system.
Thank you, Savera. Maybe Noor, you can unmute yourself, and then we have a question, great one from Mohamed in the chat. Savera.
Sure, let me.
Hello everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hi, I'm Nurulan and I'm from Pakistan. Firstly, I have to say that Savera is a ray of hope for me, because I'm listening to her story and it kind of resonates with my story. So I'm going to start off with this, that Savera, much of my ideas resonates with the things that you are doing. I've participated in Climate Hackathon. I've won that. I've also participated in a few other incubation centers, and I've actually won in second place. But the challenges I usually face is, like, firstly, how do I get a fund for such initiatives? Like, I want to recycle paper for newspapers, because you don't have to cut down many trees and regenerate paper manufacturing, but use the existing ones. Similarly, I also want to work on recycling the food waste from the food markets and actually make them into compost fertilizers or stuff like that. But the first thing is, how do I get the funding for it? And secondly, even if I do get the funding for it, the question that is in my mind is, I don't have the resources, I don't have the team, I don't have the infrastructure and machinery. How do I build myself from such a grassroots level to have a company and actually make an impact? Because I don't have the direction or the mentorship, that how do I actually set up the company and make impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sorry, did I cut you off?
No, that was all.
Okay. Well, first of all, congratulations. You're already making headway, and you've clearly tapped into some of those programs that will help you, if it's the hackathons and the was it the incubator or startup competition. My development hat says there's a lot of grants out there. More and more, I think it's moving towards looking at, infrastructure, and there's a lot of, especially if you're at a seed fund stage, and part of it a lot of the fellowships and programs will also provide technical assistance. That being said, I'll put on my entrepreneur grassroots hat, and it's still really, really hard to tap into that. And I know that the struggle is real. And I would say one part of it to kind of give you the energy is the community, like find other people like yourself, find other people that you could collaborate within, like your supply chain, for example. So if there's another startup that could feed into what your startup wants to do, then work with them and then collectively use your resources, because otherwise it gets really tiring as an individual. Whereas if you have a collective where all of you kind of play a role, so you're working as a small kind of ecosystem in yourself, and then you're applying for these kind of grants. And I would say a lot of the time, like there's a route of investment, and I don't know, in my personal experience, the investment theses and the models for investment are still quite old school in that they're very traditional and institutional capital. And a lot of the time impact, as social enterprises have a lot more impact and they don't know how to account for it. But there are funds that are looking more and more at impact and are able to capture the value of the impact that you're making. But I would say maybe at the beginning, there's also, not to say that your model shouldn't be reliant on grants, because that's not so sustainable, but at the initial stage, it's essentially the same as getting some kind of seed funding, but getting some grant funding that comes with maybe with some technical assistance is always a good way to do it. And the best way to attract that is to find the right partners and kind of go in with it together. I'm a big believer of not doing anything alone. I'm not as good at it.
Savera, there is thank you for that. There is also a question from Mohammed. Sorry, he has done in Jordan a lot of campaigns, cleaning campaigns since 10 years. They drive together and bring people together the day of the campaign, but maybe when it's not the campaign, after everything vanishes until the next campaign. So Mohammed is asking you, do you have any advice that could make this movement more impactful? Maybe how to transform these kind of moments into a social enterprise or an initiative that lasts? That's maybe the question of Mohammed. You can also unmute yourself after Mohammed. That's at least the question as I understood it.
Thanks, Mohammed. Also, congratulations for running 60 different campaigns. That's really impressive already. I don't like to give advice because I don't know. I feel like I can just speak from my experience. And one of the things that I find even with myself is I think instead of, ticking a box of like, I cleaned a beach today, or I did this thing, I think understanding your connectedness of why you're doing this, where you want to have impact. I think taking that kind of ownership within oneself, and helping people. So, because you asked, how do we promote this positive behavior? I think it has to be this kind of first on an individual level before you, a lot of people say, oh, I want to make a difference, but it always kind of starts with you being connected with yourself, and then through that connection with yourself, connecting to something that means something to you, but also makes you feel like you are being of service to something that is more than or greater than yourself. So I can tell you what we did with Ananta. So we didn't want to do any marketing and say, hey, you should do this, you should change your packaging, you should feel good. What we did was then engage people in different ways for them to come see for themselves that decision that they made to have a packet of chips, or that decision they were thirsty, so they bought this single-use plastic bottle for like 10 seconds, chugged it down and tossed it. Those minute decisions that we're not even thinking about are just accumulated on the beaches. So when you're doing something like a brand audit, which I did with Katie, who I think is on this call, or when we did a plogging race, which teams were kind of racing to collect as much waste, but then also separate it, and they were only getting points for the different materials when they segregated. They suddenly see how complex this is, and how such a simple, almost non-decision accumulated in such a complex problem. And I think when people are able to see that for themselves, to experience it for themselves, I think that leads to a more profound impact on saying, okay, how do I now undo this? How do I kind of be a part of the undoing of this predicament? If that makes sense. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to thank you. Yeah, you just gave me good advices. So we're our 10th year, so we're trying to rewrite our strategy to see how things will be moving soon.
Yeah, and I think also giving people more ownership, like if they feel more connected, like they're a part of something instead of just like coming and going. If they, they feel like they are, if there's a consistency to, if you want to do cleanups, but also can you move them somewhere more upstream of the waste. So for example, we were cleaning this wetland consistently, but the community people were coming and dumping. So we thought, okay, how do we go speak to the community and ask them, how do we help you become the custodians of this? How do we engage you in the in figuring out how you can stop doing this, or where you play a role in this the waste that's accumulating in your own community. And that's kind of, if you go back to those principles, how do we nest it within the greater ecosystem? And I think that's really necessary.
Yes, you're right. Actually, we're thinking to focus on younger generation, like school students that will have more impactful results.
Get them while they're young. They have a much better conscience and they're less jaded. I completely.
Yes. Actually, one of our goals maybe, and starting our movement in different countries also. I'm not sure if that could happen anytime in the future.
Oh, good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Nellis and the OML app is a great way to kind of connect to a greater network. I'm a big fan, so I highly recommend. I got to meet people like Kelly and Chris and Franz, so it's been amazing.
Yes,
I
we have two hands raised, one from Sarah and after Jonita. Please, Sarah El Refai, and after Jonita.
Yes, so thank you so much for the session today. It was really valuable and has a lot of good ideas. I just had a question. Me and my team are trying to get into a startup that is helping the community and the environment. So, of course, we're searching at first for an incubator. Whenever we offer a proposal to them about our idea that we worked on and we had our unfair advantage and so on, they always tell us that if someone that is big and is already in the market thought that they will have your idea and apply it the next day, what would be your idea or your advantage, or how will you not get out of the market the next day? So whatever I answer to this question, they never be convinced or think that, yes, you're right, you will not get kicked out of the market. So how to answer this and how to make something that no one can imitate? I have no idea. So if you...
No, it's a good question. And I think one part of it is, you definitely don't want to reinvent the wheel. If someone is doing something good, there's enough gaps that are not addressed that you can, address those. And sometimes it's maybe doing the same thing, but doing it differently. But the analogy that I use quite often is that if you think of a cove that's kind of beautiful and has all these minerals, but a huge ship cannot go in the cove. It has to send a small little boat that can go in and explore and think of, find new coves and explore. So huge ships, huge machines, the large companies that they're speaking of cannot be as agile and adaptive and explore new territory. They're just too big. They have too much inertia. So I would say your advantage, your unique value is the fact that you are small, you are adaptive, you are resilient, and you can be as agile as you want. Those big companies can replicate an idea, but on baseline, they can't keep changing. And so, yeah, I mean, listen, anytime I have a question, I always think, okay, but how does it happen in the natural world? And usually there's always an answer. And so if you think of like a big organism or a cluster of things, whereas if you think of a small agile creature, like what are they able to do? How do they get about? How do they leverage their networks or their systems? And I think, looking at biomimicry or looking at the way natural organisms work, and they usually have all the answers. And so that's kind of where I turn to. I try to find a system or an organism that is a good metaphor for what I'm trying to figure out or solve.
Thank you, Savera. We have a question from Jonita and after from Adenike. Thank you.
Sure. Jonita?
Hi, Savera. It's great to meet with you, everybody, and thank you for this webinar. It's my first time attending this. Anyway, your project for, South Pole and circular economy sustainability, it's one of the greatest things that's interlinked with the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, which it's an initiative that required all parties to take their roles from different countries. I think that came to your understanding as individual young women out there in the space where women have become part of a global voice. But now, on the aspect of making this program of yours a part of a global dynamic interest society, because I think your project has already a front runner to rescue a lot of crises into the global aspect that really have to deal with countries that are already vulnerable because they do not have a affirmable policy in place that protect the planet, that protect the ocean, that also trying to prevent pollution not to occur, but at the same time mitigating most of various causes of these micro pollutions into the ecosystem, because some of these people do not have expertise. I'm looking at my country, we do not have any sustainability protection for the ocean not to overdrown into pollutions, which is now caused by plastic pollutions or plastic caused by biodiversity pollution, which is the ocean itself, which is caused from the planes that live within the ocean and dive deep down the thing, and so causes the damage to the fish and to the ocean ecosystem itself, which is the huge source to
Juanita, what's the question?
My question is interlinking that. Is there the opportunity in the future that you might need to have some representative or ambassador to connect with you, like becoming the wings pioneer of your project? Because since it's part of the SDG interlinking, I think that's kind of a great initiative. What I'm asking is that you have a future in dealing with connecting to country. I think more younger people, if you bring them to become pioneer wings to fly your project to their country, then they can also be custodian benefit in terms of becoming more vocal and leaders into partnering with you in the project.
So short answer is, you're already on OML. I think that's what they're trying to do. But the second thing is that, just to clarify, so my startup, the one that I mentioned first, Ananta, that just does the community projects. We don't run as a business because I joined the UN, obviously not my initiative. And also South Pole it's a global company. Again, it's not my initiative. So South Pole is, within its own frame, scaling as a company. Me as an individual, I try to support in different ways, different networks that I believe are, doing this and spreading the network effect. But I mean, Nellis is doing exactly that, and that's where I think 1 million leaders, the app is really trying to do exactly what you're saying, is connecting different initiatives and people and leaders, so that there's a collective push in the same direction and the same values. So I think you're already in the right place. You may have answered your own question without knowing it by just showing up to this and maybe following
Now,
what Mel is doing.
no, sorry, Savera, please go on. Okay.
Promise
No, just
a paid
we,
advert. I just believe in what they're doing.
it's now just to say we have one last question from Adenike from Nigeria, and then we will close the session. We had a lot of questions. Everything has been recorded and will be displayed in the app, so everything can be seen again and again. And we can also continue the conversation with Savera. Why not to partner with her and with her experience and kindness. So thank you, Adenike, for your last question, and after we close the session.
Thank you very much. So as you've known, I'm Adenike from Nigeria, and I'm happy to have been a part of this. I was driving downtown in Lagos and I saw a lot of plastics, in the waterway, and I made up my mind to do something about it. So I'd like to know if your organization partners with other organizations in Africa, in Nigeria specifically. Perhaps we could do something together. That's my question. Thank you.
So the company I work for is South Pole. So there's a new program which tries to essentially connect financing from the corporates that we work with the plastic collection projects on the ground. We have partnered with a company called Taka Taka in recycling in Kenya, but we have not done anything in Nigeria. The only problem is that the certification of these projects is a year-long exercise to make sure that there's actual impact through, and sometimes it's through what is called plastic credits, and some of it is just through a direct financing. So I don't know if that answers your question. So right now I'm as an employee of South Pole, looking at Asia Pacific. We do have some projects in Africa, but I don't know if you're asking for South Pole, the company that I work for, and it's not by any means a startup, guys. There's 1,500 employees across the world, but it's in climate solutions. So they do have projects in Africa, if that answers your question. Me, on a personal level, I'm not so involved with anything in Africa.
Thank you, Savera.
Okay.
It is fine. Again, we can connect again and again after. Really, thank you for this journey and everything you presented, and thank you everyone also for the question and the comments in the chat. I'm happy to see that a lot of people want to follow the path of Savera in their own context and in their own ways, for sure. And so thank you again, Savera. Thank you also, Kelly, for supporting us and recording everything today. I will say bye-bye, au revoir. And good night also, because in Singapore it must be very late now. So yes, bye-bye, Savera. See you soon on the OML app and Nelly's context.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Franz, and just being so diligent and following up, and Kelly for all the support, and everyone for showing up. I didn't think anyone would want to come listen to me, so thank you. Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of Nellis, so that's why I keep coming back, and I hope all of you guys do through the app. Thank you, and have a beautiful day, and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, and good luck with your project, guys.
Yes, good luck. And feel free to email me.
And feel free to email Savera.